Attention all you rule breakers, you misfits and troublemakers, all you free spirits and pioneers, all you visionaries and nonconformists. Everything the establishment has told you is wrong with you is actually what's right with you. You see things others don't. You are hardwired to change the world.
You are listening to the Spiritual Activist Radio Show, and I am Rahasya Uncensored, where we look at the world not as it is, but as we know it can be, if and only if we have the courage to question the answers we've been given. This is our world, and it's time for us to take it back. So, welcome once again to the BBS radio show called Spiritual Activist. And my name is Rahasya Uncensored. And today we're going to have a little bit of fun at the expense of maybe a lot of delusional people, in my opinion. I need to tackle this, the critical race theory. It just blows my mind when I hear people start talking about this and they don't even know what they're talking about. And then when I actually started reading what critical race theory is, it reminded me of something way back in the 90s, I think it was, the Sokal hoax. Now, let me try to unpack this and weave it together for you, because here's what the problem is, in my opinion. When I read and see what's going on today, I'm left with the undeniable conclusion, and I hate to use the word conclusion, but in this case, it's probably appropriate. When I see what's going on and the amount of confirmation bias and some actually mental delusionary thinking, I'm stuck with actually two groups of people. One is delusional thinking. And there's just no other nicer way to put it than that. The other one are social political activists with an agenda. There's a few people in between, but it's almost nominal when you stop and think about it. So first, let's get into, and I'm going to show you why this is. Why is it that being a Hang on. So why is it that critical race theory is reminding me of the Sokal hoax? First, we have to see what critical race theory is saying for me to come to this kind of parallel. So here's what critical race theory actually says it is. So this is from the Britannica.com website. I didn't even think Britannica still existed, but let's see what more or less the critical race theory actually means to most people. Critical race theory is an intellectual movement and a framework of legal analysis according to which race is a culturally invented category used to oppress people of color, and the law and legal institutions of the United States are inherently racist insofar as they function to create and maintain social, political, and economic inequalities between white people and non-white people. Okay, first of all, I can agree with there is an imbalance. That imbalance quickly shows up for me. I'm glad I live in a white society. I'm glad I'm a white person. I have a little bit of biasness there, of course, but I honestly don't see critical race theory playing in this to the extent that they're saying that our laws, our institutions, our country, our social, everything is based around this. And me being a white person, I am a white racist. And if I say I'm not a white racist, that actually guarantees the fact that I am a white racist. So it's a catch-22 a little bit there. So critical race theory developed in the 1970s as an effort by activists and legal scholars. Another key word here, legal scholars. You need to remember that as we go on with the Sokal hoax. Scholars to understand why the US civil rights movement had lost momentum and was in danger of being reversed. Their approach emphasized general and systemic features of the legal system and served to perpetuate race-based oppression and white privilege. I can also see a little bit of that at that time. We were just coming out of really confronting racism and everything that went on during the 60s. Martin Luther King trying to tell us, don't judge people by their color, judge them by the content of their character, which is what I still do. I unthinkingly do that. When I meet a black person, the first thing that comes to my mind isn't, oh, it's a black person. I look at that person as a human being. It doesn't matter who they are. I am getting a little bit, I guess, suspicious of some races right now because of everything that's going on. And it's a constant battle inside myself to make sure that I'm not falling into some kind of a trap. I know all Chinese people aren't out to get me. I know all Arab people aren't out to blow me up. But there's so much going on that it does take a mentally active person to constantly dismantle that biasness. I'm afraid most people don't do that, though. And again, this is from Britannica. Why is critical race theory important? Critical race theory is important because it potentially provides a more realistic understanding of white racism in the United States as not merely a set of negative attitudes towards racial groups, but also a body of law and legal practices whose real world effect is the oppression of people of color, especially African Americans. Now, okay, I'm really trying to be open and non-biased and non-white, I guess you might say. Looking back, I can see, especially in housing, like in places like Chicago and New York, there was definitely, it's tough on people of color with housing, although that's loosening up and we have been progressing. Now, so much of that's come out and we're dealing with it little by little, but I think the point here is we've been dealing with it and things are getting better. And my question is, when you're dealing with a problem, and I think there has been a problem with racial relations in the United States. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot, which there are a few out there that say there's absolutely no problem at all. That's not really true. But as you're solving the problem over decades of rewriting laws, writing supportive laws, and trying to take the suppression away from certain groups. And that's another thing too. I know we're in a war right now, but that war isn't a race war. It's a cultural war. I mean, all you have to do is look out there. The people that are suppressing us, they're all colors. But the one thing they're globalist and they're corporations and they're media. That's the war that we're really on. They're trying to divide us according to race, to keep us divided and keep us from doing what we're doing right now, talking and communicating. So here, let's go on. And then again, we're still in Britannica. How does critical race theory challenge the neutrality law? Critical race theorists argue that laws explicitly impose a neutral standard with respect to race and are capable of addressing only the most egregious forms of race-based oppression. Well, you can take that for what it's worth. Okay, now that is a really quick overview of critical race theory. Now, if you get into critical race theory and the supporting academic foundations of it, which I have, and I implore you, do your research. I've talked to people that are totally for critical race theory, and I ask them, well, what does it mean to you? And they can't even tell me because they haven't even read it. They haven't read the fundamental academic reasons for this. And the people that are against it, which I include myself in that group, we have read it. And it's the same thing with vaccinations. It's the same thing with what went on in the election. Uh, if you're against this stuff, you tend to read the evidence a little more. And we could get into that, but I think I'd probably get kicked off of YouTube still, even though they're starting to say you can bring up elections and things like that now, which is good, to start. It's going to be hard to backtrack a lot of this. So the one thing I want to bring up now is the Sokal hoax. And if you don't know what that is, let me tell you. Okay, now this is called the Sokal hoax. Excuse me. It's also known as the Sokal affair. And this is from Wikipedia. Now, what brought me onto this was a couple of characters. What was their name? Peter Boghossian, and I'll get into these two later because it's really worth listening to. Maybe I'll play a little clip from them. Um, their movement is called the Sokal Squared Scandal. And it's so funny on one hand, but when you really apply it to real life, it's not all that great. This is what the Sokal affair is. I'll just do a brief overview of this for people who don't know what this is. The Sokal affair, also called the Sokal hoax, was a demonstrative scholarly hoax performed by Alan Sokal, a physicist professor at a New York University and University College of London. In 1996, Sokal submitted an article to Social Text, an academic journal of postmodern cultural studies. The submission was an experiment to test the journal's intellectual rigor, and especially to investigate whether a leading North American journal of cultural studies, whose editorial collective includes such luminaries as Frederick Jameson and Andrew Ross. I mean, these are scholarly papers and scholarly people, okay? The article was called Transgressing the Boundaries, and subtitle is Towards a Transformative they make up some of these words, by the way. Towards a Transformative Hermeneutics of Quantum Gravity. It was published in the journal's Spring-Summer 1996 Science Wars issue. It proposed that quantum gravity is a social and linguistic construct. At that time, the journal did not practice academic peer review, and it did not submit the article to outside expert review by a physicist, which a lot of them don't. And we're going to get into why that is. 3 weeks after its publication, Sokal revealed to the magazine Lingua Franca that the article was a hoax. The hoax caused controversy and blah, 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 went on and on and on. It was a big uproar. People was against this guy Sokal so bad. And it was mostly the academic people who got sucked into it. And here's what a Sokal hoax is based on. They go out and get a lot of really good sounding, matter of fact, I'll tell you one, and this is about the thing with dog humping. It's like, you go, what? Any moron that would believe this would have to be a moron. No, you have to be an academic intellectual to believe this bullshit. It's because they use the academic crazy linguistics to prop up their hoax. And you're little by little, I'm sure you're going to figure out why it is I'm aligning this with critical race theory, because that's what they're doing. When you really read it and really drill down into the definitions, and see what they're actually saying, it sort of falls apart. It doesn't make any sense. I have yet to find any laws anywhere in the United States that's based upon suppressing the races. We have gone over these laws and over them, trying to figure out and trying to make things more equitable for people of color. Seems strange to say people of color. I'm talking about black people mostly, but brown people too. You have to be so careful of your words nowadays. Um, but this guy, Sokal, wrote a paper saying that gravity was a social construct. And how he got around doing that was by using academic words and scientific words and making it sound so legitimate that it was actually accepted into scientific journals. And people read it, academic people even read it, mostly academic people. Thought, okay, this sounds really fascinating, intriguing. This is interesting. We need to like really look into this, and they did, and it sounded so great. But when it all came out that it was a hoax, man, the blowback that Sokol received was unbelievable, and there was nothing hoaxy about the blowback at all. Where most of the people that read it that had a little bit of common sense and wasn't academically indoctrinated to that particular perspective looked at it and they would read it and go, I don't know, this sounds a little suspicious. How could gravity be a social construct? And you keep reading it and you see all the scientific words, the physics laws behind it, which were nonsense, and everything sounded so legitimate until you did something. And that something is called thinking. People aren't thinking anymore. I wrote an article for my magazine in this recent issue called Toxic Tribalism and the Manufacturing of Madness in Crowds. And I bring up, it was in the Washington Post. They wrote an article about critical thinking. And the criticism is simply this, that people are so disinformed, misinformed, and uninformed, and slow readers, and lethargic and apathetic to what's going on, that doing critical thinking is nearly impossible. We have undereducated our young people. They don't read very fast anymore. They can only read snippets. Go to YouTube. It's the reason YouTube's are 3 to 5, 6, 7 minutes. If it's any longer than that, people click off. But anything that makes sense, like if you're watching this on YouTube, look at the views. It's not that many views. I mean, if I had a cat doing some weird thing, licking its rear end or doing something bizarre, it would get millions of views. If I had somebody falling down stairs and everybody laughing their ass off, it would get millions of views. What kind of people are on YouTube anymore? I've gone to some really, really good YouTubes, good information, and 1,000, maybe 2,000 views, and every single one of them are likes, and hardly any thumbs down. Of course, you go to YouTubes with cats doing weird things, and there's like millions of likes too. Few people read it or watch it and go, "What the hell?" Give it a thumbs down. Okay, so now I'm going to read a little bit about Peter Boghossian and James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. That almost sounds like a hoax, but it's not. She's well educated and educated in a good, open-minded way. And this is from Wikipedia. The Grievance Studies Affair, also referred to as the Sokal Squared Scandal, was the project of a team of 3 authors, Peter Boghossian, James Lindsay, he likes to be called Jim, and Helen Pluckrose, to highlight what they saw as poor scholarship and eroding criteria in several academic fields. Taking place over 2017, 2018, their project entailed submitting bogus papers to academic journals in cultural, queer, race, gender, fat, and sexual studies to determine if they would pass through their peer review and be accepted for publication. Several of these papers were subsequently published, which the authors cited in support of their contention. Now, here's the background. Prior to the affair, concerns about the intellectual validity of much research influenced by postmodern philosophy and critical theory were highlighted by various academics who composed nonsensical hoax articles. Now, here's something interesting. I'm gonna find their hoax papers on dog humping because this gets into something very strange here. Um, okay, Bagassi and Lindsay and Pluckrose wrote 20 articles that promoted deliberately absurd ideas or morally questionable acts and submitted them to various peer-reviewed journals. Although they had planned for the project to run until July of 2019, the trio admitted to the hoax in October 2018 after journals from the Wall Street Journal revealed that Helen Wilson, the pseudonym used for her article published in Gender, Place, and Culture, did not exist. By the time of the reveal, 4 of the 20 papers had been published. And I probably think that almost all of them would have been published if it wasn't prematurely revealed. 3 had been accepted but not published, 6 had been rejected, and 7 were still under review. Included among the articles that were published were arguments that dogs engage in rape culture and that men could reduce their transphobia by anally penetrating themselves with sex toys, as well as, and they based this on Adolf Hitler's Mein Kampf. It was rewritten in feminist language. The first of these had won special recognition from the journal that published it. And it's funny too, because they said they received and they got their data from watching thousands and thousands of dogs' testicles in a dog park. I mean, that should have been a clue. But like I say, they used academic words. So the academic people just said, "Oh, this is fascinating. This is interesting. We could learn a lot by seeing how dogs hump in dog parks and maybe cure some of this the raping that's going on with men and women." And they even put this in a feminist um, periodical also, and it was accepted. Um, okay, let me go on and on. It's so bizarre. I can't even think I'm talking about this kind of stuff in relationship to what's actually going on in the world with critical race theory and everything else. But this is what they're doing. And the reason I'm bringing up the Sokal hoax is because this clearly points out, and if you're armed with this knowledge, when you read some of these papers, it really helps to shift your perspective a little bit. And with that shift of perspective, you start seeing the underlying intent and how they engage you with academic words, scientific words, and socially acceptable terms that they're totally changing the definition of. Like, to be a racist doesn't even come close to what being a racist used to mean. Now you're a racist if you say you're not a racist. You're a racist if you're white. If you're black, it's almost impossible to be a racist. So if you're black and say, no, I'm not a racist, well, you're not a racist. But if I'm white, which I am, and I say, I'm not a racist, I actually not. I do see some a bias there because I am a white person in a white body in a white culture, and I've been raised this way, but I see that, I deal with it. But I'm not a racist. I can say that honestly. Swear to God, strike me dead right here. I am not a racist, but that means I am. How have we got to this point? I've been watching a lot of what's going on with the election that took place. There's some legitimate questions there, but yet you can't question it, because if you do, you're a white supremacist, Republican, flag waving American. But they don't call us Americans. They call us a bunch of other names that they've divided us up in. The thing with the I can't even hardly talk about this without laughing. The thing with dog humping and showing the relationship uh, that dogs do in dog parks, and keep in mind this was published in scientific papers, that you can learn a lot and maybe start dealing with the attitudes of men raping other men and women by watching dogs and what happens to dogs humping in the park and their testicles. And you have to read it. I can't take the time to read the whole paper, but when you read it, the academic language is so clear that, wow, these are really smart people. They're onto something. This sounds really legitimate. And they've done like 20 of these kinds of papers. And it just points out, once again, it points out to the fact that a hoax, a complete hoax, can look really legitimate until you start thinking about it. And I suggest, the way our country's going right now, we better start thinking about everything, critically thinking about it, using the frontal lobes, which, by the way, are shut down to some extent when you're deep into fear. If you're into fear, that's where they want to keep us. CNN, MSNBC, all the network channels, their basic premise is to keep us in fear of the others. And the others have been uh, compartmentalized, labeled, and put over here. These people have been put over here. Sometimes they plot us against each other. And I can tell. Matter of fact, I'll tell you, this is a personal story. I won't mention his name because for personal reasons. But my wife, she has had AFib, mitral valve prolapse, AFib, and she had an ablation a while back. The ablation caused more problems than it cured. So recently she went to AFib for about 3 days. So we took her down to, I won't say the name of the hospital, but in Chico, and they gave her a cardioversion, which is a way to pulse your heart back into beat. When they did the cardioversion, it gave her an aneurysm, a brain aneurysm. She almost died. They put her on the helicopter, flew her to San Francisco, to the University of California medical neurological place there, because they have the technology and the doctors and everything, and they saved her life. She's home now, thank goodness, after 10 days in the hospital. But while I was there, I renting rooms. I mean, it's $35 a day just to park. Renting rooms is $150, $200 a day. So I got in touch with a friend of mine that lives in San Francisco. Now, this friend, he's a genius. His IQ, 160, 170, 180 sometimes. Photographic memory. He's made millions of dollars by using his mind to critically analyze situations and spit out the data to where people can use that data to solve problems. And every time I've had a problem, like with my magazine, I've called him up, say, hey, this is the situation, da 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 da. He would think it over for a few seconds, sometimes about a minute or two, say, okay, here's what you should do. He'd spit out the data, and I would get that data and go, wow, yeah, I've never thought about that before. He could critically analyze by reaching out over his wide spectrum of analytical thinking and what he's read over the years, and synthesize it bring it right down into something that I could use. It's been invaluable over the years. So I get in touch with him and his wife. They live in a beautiful home, um, Bentley, Rolls Royce. These people are like being at the top of their game, although I suspect something's going on there that's financially a little precarious because he's totally into the system. I honestly thought when I would visit him, we could sit down and he would have a conversation with me about all the things I think about and have a little bit different perspective. But as soon as I got to his home, he wanted me to wear a mask. He said that they've both been vaccinated twice. Um, Caused a little bit of a problem, a little numbness and all that, but wanted me to wear a mask because I was in danger, even in their house. I said, well, okay, I think I'm going to take my chances, you know, and I knew that I probably should stay away from that was enough. I should maybe stay away from talking about what's going on. But after watching MSNBC for about an hour and a half, I'm just going, oh my God, almost 80, maybe 90% of what they're talking about was easily debunked. Easily. I don't care who you were. Just somebody with an IQ over 90 could debunk what they're talking about. But it was all made to reinforce anger, aggression, and fear. Well, finally he turned it off and we were talking a little bit. And he told me, he says, you need to be more serious about this virus because it's killed over all of the people that died in World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, Korean War, the Gulf War. It's killed hundreds of millions of people. And I'm sitting there going, wow, he's delusionary, completely delusionary, reaching out for anything that can support his previously held fears and perceptions. He went down this weird rabbit hole. I only spent one night. I couldn't spend any more. Um, it was a sad thing to see, but I'm seeing that in so many people. Um, Trump derangement. My God, you know. Then you have the other people that think Trump is the second coming of Jesus, and it's the same. Oh my God, we're talking about a human being. He has flaws, like probably more than most. But you know, I told my friend in San Francisco, I said, well, because he started talking really bad about Trump, and of course, I said, well, here's my feeling of Trump that you might be able to agree with. I didn't even get into some of the things that I think about Trump, which is positive. We used to have a border, we used to have an economy. We used to have relationships with European countries. We used to have peace in the Middle East. I mean, these are all facts. These aren't biased or perceptions or delusional thinking on my part. I'm paying almost twice as much for gas right now. Thank God I needed to do some work on my property. I went out and bought a bunch of lumber and plywood. Now it's over 4 times the amount. If I had to do it now, I wouldn't be able to afford to do that. And it's just, I guess it was a feeling that I should do that. Same feeling, that reason I'm buying rice and beans still and stashing them away. And it's just common sense. But talking with him and realizing the delusionary thinking that people go into. I mean, I have friends that are totally for Biden, and the rationale that they come up with to explain why he's forgetting, he doesn't know where he is sometimes, and he appears on the world stage as being so weak. Uh, I mean, people like Putin eat this guy for breakfast. They had their summit meeting, which they shouldn't call it a summit meeting. It's just a meeting. I mean, he gave away everything but the kitchen sink. And I don't, like I say, sometimes I feel very strange talking about these things because it shouldn't be a matter of contention or conflict or different points of view. It is what it is. Uh, he can't walk straight. I think his wife should be brought up on charges of elder abuse. She knew going into this. She's a doctor. She knew that this is way over his pay grade and head to be able to handle. I mean, I would not have Biden come in and try to balance my checkbook or watch my house. I wouldn't be able to trust him. He's You telling me that he's watching the whole country? How could that possibly be? I mean, we've always suspected the president really doesn't make the decisions. Well, now we know. We have a president that can't make the decisions, but makes you wonder who is making the decisions. Um, I think at some point, this is this is a good surprise me if it makes the filter on YouTube. I'll put it up on my BitChute channel too. But you have to eventually come to some conclusions here. One is half of our Congress and senators and representatives, they're either on drugs, which some of them are, a good portion of them are, um, have a mental illness, delusionary, or they're out and out criminals. Because what's happening in this country, in my opinion, is a crime. And the fact that it's a crime to even say it's a crime tells me a lot about the area that we're in right now. And how do I know it's a crime? Because they're breaking laws. They're breaking laws. There is no such thing as illegal immigration. Immigration is legal. Everything else is a bunch of criminals walking across the border. And it's so unfair to let these people be in that position. You know, my heart reaches out, but this country accepts 1 million people a year legally, and that's a lot of people. And but now we're accepting people from over 50 countries are coming across our border. And I guarantee you they're not coming here to work at McDonald's. They're coming here with intentions, and a lot of them are bad intentions, MS-13 and different gangs. But what this really gets down into is the human trafficking. There's thousands and thousands of kids that we have no idea where they're being taken. And people don't want to hear that. And if you don't want to hear that, then you are on the wrong podcast, because you might as well just go and put your head in the sand and wait until the bitter end. But we all need to start paying attention and speaking up for these kids. You know, Tim Ballard of Operation Underground Railroad has talked about this, and the fact that we are now, this country, our government, is in charge of the largest human trafficking on the planet. We're thousands and thousands of people a month are being trafficked in by human traffickers, making millions of dollars. And with that comes fentanyl and all the drugs, which is going to penetrate every city that we have. I think if they did build a wall today, and there was a solid wall there, and we absolutely stopped every single person from coming in and let them come in and apply for asylum legitimately, but stop everything. At this point, we would be in a terrible situation. Terrible. And I hear people with the argument, they say that, well, this is a good thing. They're going to come up here and work. Well, yeah, some of them are. Uh, Mexicans are known to come up here and work, do jobs that we don't particularly like to do, but they come up here and work. Some people from Central America, but this isn't the people I'm talking about. I'm talking about Syria and Libya and Czechoslovakia and Russia and Ukraine. These people aren't coming here to work. They're not coming here to work. And what kind of work can they get with no paperwork? You know, like I say, I feel like it's hard to talk about this without sounding patronizing, like I'm talking to little children, but it is what it is. I mean, it's so simple and so basic to see what's going on. And but back, I'm regressing a little bit back to the Sokal hoax. Here's the point I want to get across. When you are reading papers that are coming out of Congress and coming out of some of these social organizations, read them in such a light and really drill down into some of the words they're using. And don't let them tell you that, no, this word doesn't mean this anymore. This word now means this. That's not true. Words are based upon facts, and it's how we use our language. I mean, when I say him, that means he is a male. When I say her, that means it is a female. But we're being told that no, that's not what it means at all. They're socially identifying with something totally different, a gender, a difference in gender. Well, I'm sorry, I can't join in with this delusion and lie with you. It goes against, if I was religious, it would go against my religion, but it goes against everything that I see as common sense, let alone undeniable biological facts. If they want to be called a him when she or he is a her, fine, but don't make me have to pretend with you. That doesn't make any sense at all. And that's all we do. I wrote a book a while back called To Believe or Not to Believe, the Social and Neurological Consequences of Belief Systems. And my definition of a belief is when we pretend to know something that's unknowable and somehow forget that we started out pretending. And now we hold it as a belief and part of a systemized way of seeing the world. And slowly it eases over into our pile of what we know. We know that 2 + 2 = 4. Until recently, apparently that's a racist thing. And then, okay, I'm just all over the place, but we can't use mother anymore. We have to use a birthing person. I mean, what's that about? We can't use apple pie because apples were grown by this guy named Johnny Appleseed was planting seeds all over Indian land and growing apples. And the sugar comes from sugar plantations that are slave labor. So we can't even use mom's apple pie anymore. We have to say, what? A birthing mother's, what? We're sort of like stuck. There's so many things that are being canceled. I was canceled by friends when I interviewed the local police chief. And I agreed with him that, yes, there is racism, and it's a definite problem within law enforcement. But it's the system itself isn't built on racism. There's not one law in law enforcement that is built around segregating people and racism. And here's an interesting thing for you. I've asked several people, how many people do you think last year, how many people, Black people, do you think were killed by white police officers that were unarmed Black people killed by white police officers? I had people tell me, well, 100, maybe 200. I had one person say 2,000. And this is weird, really weird too. The higher the level of people, Black people that were killed by white officers, had directly to do with what news programs they were watching and whether they were Democrats. Republicans, they still had it off, but it was a little bit closer. It was 18 people. And a lot of those unarmed 18 Black people actually had weapons or clubs and things like that. And you can do that with almost everything that's being talked about right now. If you drill down and really unpack it and see what the actual, here's this crazy word, facts are, it doesn't line up with what they're saying, but they're just saying it and using a lot of these words that are academic words, scientific words, statistics that they make up. It sounds like, oh my God, maybe this country is racist. Maybe we should have totally revamping of the police force, which probably we should. We should really look at how policing is done. And I mean, I'm not too sure we need to send an armed police officer to every single instance. It'd be nice if social services could take over some of that, but wait until the first social service person goes out to a family husband and wife conflict and gets shot. Then it's going to be a big scandal. You know, it's I mean, there's a time and a place for having armed law enforcement because it does make a difference. When you see a police officer that has a gun, it tends to make people pay attention a little bit closer and listen to what they're telling you, because they're probably there because you're disturbing the peace or breaking the law or something. There's some reason somebody called the police in on you. Getting a little bit off here, but the underlying intent of everything I'm saying is the Sokal hoax. You need to look that up and really use that information and realize that academic papers, really people, the intellectuals, they totally accepted a paper telling us that by watching thousands of dogs and seeing how their testicles and penises were working in the dog park when they were humping could tell us something about uh, men raping women, and how we could learn something from this. And they actually accepted it and published it. And the whole thing was based around Mein Kampf. They used, I think it was like the 14th chapter of Mein Kampf, and just took out all the Nazi words and a lot of the jargon that would give it away, but used the same format to prove the point. And here we are today. I mean, it doesn't get much stranger than it is today. So before I close, I want to have a little bit of fun here. You know, try to end this on a little bit of a light note. Um, Here's something curious. Before I'm going to play a little bit of the best of Peter Boghossian, the guy that has been doing this with his friend Jim Lindsay, with exposing how easy it is to hoax people and sound legitimate. But I'm just here on YouTube right now. I mean, some of the blowback is getting really strong. Here's one with what's his name?
There were more than 79.5.
This is Don Lemon. Don Lemon is blasted for calling out the privilege of basically saying he's blasting critical race theory critics. So how deep can we go? Do we criticize the critics that's criticizing critical race theory, and can we criticize those? I mean, we got to a place of absurdity. And here's one from Project Veritas, and I highly recommend these people. Fox 26 reporter Ivory Hecker releases tape of bosses.
Fox came at my throat.
This is crazy. I mean, people are being attacked. I could go down. It's just all crazy, 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 crazy. But the crazy is sort of non-crazy people pointing out the craziness of what quote unquote normal people are accepting, which is what this whole podcast has been about. So I'm just going to play a little bit from some of the best of Peter Boghossian, some of his interviews, and you'll get an idea of what he does. And I'll just sign off right now. And if you want to know more about me, you can. I have some other interviews on bitshoot.com/Rahasya Uncensored. You can check out my magazine at LotusGuide.com. And of course, my bbsradio.com/spiritual activist podcast, which is good to listen to in your car. And my YouTube channel, which is basically worthless. I don't even promote it anymore, but it's youtube.com/LotusGuide. I used to get thousands and thousands of hits, but somehow they've throttled me down. I've been hit by them a couple times for infringement, which they've yet to explain. But I've even lost some of my subscribers. I used to have a few 100,000 more subscribers than I have. And I know they're throttling me down. It's getting harder to find my YouTubes. So it doesn't matter. I like everybody to go to BBS Radio anyway, and there's always BitChute. So if you want to email me, if you have any questions, it's Rahasya, RAHASYA at USA.com. Now let's have a few laughs at some other people's expense for a change.
We had people argue that it would be reasonable for people to engage in thousands of hours of masturbation and take the implicit bias test about women in science every 2 hours for a year.
Yeah, so we started about a year and a half ago now, it was last summer. We started writing a bunch of academic papers for the journals that represent these fields. And so everybody understands what an academic paper is getting out of the gate. This isn't like an op-ed that you dash off for like Washington Post or some magazine or whatever. This is a thing like academics work their careers to write 1 or 2 of these a year.
Yeah.
And so they're really hard to write. They're supposed to be hard to get published. So we wrote 20 of them in 10 months. And 7 of those got accepted. 4 were actually published.
And publishing is the coin of the realm. Like, that's it. So the ideal is 1 paper every year in the humanities broadly. So that's how you credential yourself, that's how you get tenure, which is a job for life. That's how you get to teach people these ideas who then, as you said, go out into the workforce, 5, 6 years later and infect everybody with total silliness. So it's the gold standard peer review. So we saw a tremendous problem.
So we had an article, the one that got the most press was about dog humping in Portland, Oregon.
This stuff spills out into the real world, and it spills out consistently, and we've now trained an entire generation of people both to be brittle when they hear something, to be offended. Like that, if you have a belief that's unevidenced, or if you're a intensely ideological person, then you have to do something to make up the slack when someone contradicts you. Mm-hmm. When you're faced with an alternative, an idea, you can lie, you can be offended, we can walk away, you can scream at people and call them a racist, but you can't engage their ideas. And now we've taught, and I'm deeply concerned about this, because we've taught an entire generation of kids to not do that. What we should be doing is to not teach them how to suspend their judgments, but to make better, more discerning judgments, particularly as that spills into the moral sphere. Think about if you did this to civil engineers with bridge building. They would have thanked us, right? Because they're driving over the bridges with their families, so they don't want the bridges to collapse.
I mean, it's so absurd, it's even breaking my brain to think about. We had people argue that it would be reasonable for people to engage in thousands of hours of masturbation and take the implicit bias test about women in science every 2 hours for a year.
It is interesting, and I don't want to ride this hobby horse too much, but it seems to me that there's one single source where only in theology and gender studies do you have rampant biology denialism. And it seems to me that all of the disciplines that have been infected by postmodernism are subject to this in some way. And if you haven't seen it, I'd suggest that you might lose a couple of IQ points from watching, but if you haven't seen it, watch Jordan Peterson's debate with gender studies scholar Nicholas Mate.
Basically, it's not correct that there is such a thing as biological sex.
It is an absolutely fascinating example of someone who's completely disconnected from reality at the most fundamental level. And how this person is allowed to teach in our institutions, I think, is really the fundamental question. Again, I don't want to ride this hobby horse too much, but I think that these folks have created their own journals. They've literally manufactured their own body of knowledge, of scholarship, and they publish in these, and then they credential themselves. If I may, please, on that question. You know what I feel is just a shame? It's not only that we're polarized, it's that we've lost friendships. Like, people aren't friends with people who have substantive disagreements. Who cares if someone disagrees with you about something? You know what I mean? Look at this guy's a college Republican. I've never voted Republican in my life, right? And I haven't. I'm inveterate liberal, and here's the college Republican guy in the suit. So who cares? You can be, my dentist is here. I don't know what he is. My doctor is here. My buddies. I don't know what these people. What difference does it make what someone's political beliefs are? You have bonds beyond ideologies and friendships and kindness and compassion and decency. And I think that gets lost. And what a shame for everybody. What a shame.
I don't know. I'm afraid not only for the state of science, but the state of humanities. When I see, when someone says I'm offended, that's it. That's the end of the discourse. I mean, that's it.
I mean, may I quote Stephen Fry when somebody... You're offended, so fucking what?
I think that gets back to the value that we were speaking about. Like, how do you help people to value saying, I don't know? How do we create a culture where that's not only acceptable, but where that's almost relished?
I strongly agree with that.
Don't pretend to know things you don't know. Be honest. Readily admit your ignorance. If you don't know, say I don't know. Don't be a fake. Don't apologize or mumble in the defense of reason. Don't tone it down or talk baby talk. Apologize for something you said only if you're genuinely sorry, not because it hurt someone's feelings or because it offended someone or because you were subjected to personal criticism or because you were bullied.
Let's look at differences between men and women that are explicitly anatomical and physiological. Are men taller than women on average? Does anyone take offense at that fact? Are you irritated?
There's always a standout.
So I would say you could be irritated by it. You could be irritated by the fact that women have to be the ones to gestate and lactate. You could be irritated by a lot of truths. But taking offense is a response that is rejection of reality. So men and women are different on height, they're different on muscle mass, they're different on where fat is deposited on our bodies, right? Our brains are also different. So there's some binaries.
Security! This is what happens. Oh, did they shut off the volume? Can you hear? Can everybody hear? People do not have the right, fringe elements of society do not have the right to hold you hostage to discourse. This is a university. If we cannot have this conversation here, we can't have it anywhere. We have to be able to talk about it. No issues will solve themselves. That sort of behavior is unacceptable in civilized societies.